June 26, 1977. Market Square Arena, Indianapolis. The lights go down. 18,000 people are on their feet, screaming a name that has defined American music for 2 decades. Elvis Presley walks out one last time. Nobody in that room knows it. Not the fans, not the band, not even Elvis himself. Not with certainty, but this is the final curtain. 51 days later, the world will lose him forever. This is the story of that last night. The cracks nobody wanted to see, the warning signs hidden behind sequins and sweat, and the heartbreaking truth that history only understood in hindsight. By 1977, Elvis Presley had been performing almost non-stop for over a decade. What most fans didn't realize was how grueling his touring schedule had become. Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, had built a business model around constant motion. Cities blurring into one another, hotel rooms swapped for tour buses swapped for private jets. Elvis was performing dozens of shows a year, well into his 40s. At a pace that would exhaust performers half his age. The man on stage in Indianapolis was not the lean. Electric 1968 comeback special Elvis burned into pop culture memory. Years of prescription medication use, poor diet, and irregular sleep had taken a visible toll. Photos and video from that final tour show a performer who looked older than his 42 years, swollen, sluggish, sometimes struggling to remember lyrics to songs he'd sung 1,000 times. Yet even in that state, something remarkable happened almost every night. The moment the music started, a switch would flip. Longtime band members later described watching him summon just enough of the old fire to get through a set, powered as much by muscle memory and sheer will as by physical strength. Backup singers and musicians who worked those final shows would go on to say, in interviews years afterward, that they sensed something was deeply wrong, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Elvis was the king. Kings don't get told they look unwell. Kings don't get told to stop. That silence, the collective decision by an entire inner circle to avoid the hard conversation, is one of the most quietly devastating parts of this story. His father, his doctor, his closest friends, many saw the decline happening in real time. Interventions were discussed. None succeeded. The machine around Elvis Presley had become too large, too profitable, and too afraid of confrontation to pump the brakes. Backstage in Indianapolis, according to accounts from people who were there, Elvis seemed unusually reflective. He spent time before the show talking with his father Vernon and with his fiancée, Ginger Alden. Some who spoke to journalists in later years recalled him seeming tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, a kind of weariness that had settled into him. Whether that was foresight, ordinary fatigue, or simply hindsight coloring memory is impossible to know for certain. But the stage was set, quite literally, for a night that would take on outsized meaning only after it ended. What nobody in that arena understood was that they were about to witness the closing of an era, not just a concert, but the final live performance of a man who had reshaped what it meant to be a global superstar. When Elvis stepped onto that Indianapolis stage on June 26th, the crowd's reaction was, by every account, as thunderous as ever. Fans who had followed him since the 1950s stood next to teenagers discovering him for the first time. For them, this wasn't a farewell. It was just another electric night, with the man who invented modern celebrity dot the set list. That night makes the classics. Fans expected with newer material he'd been performing on that tour. Between songs, Elvis engaged in the kind of loose, rambling banter that had become a signature of his later live shows. Jokes with the band, asides to the audience. Moments of surprising warmth and humor that showed flashes of the charisma that made him a phenomenon in the first place. Physically, though, the strain was visible to anyone paying close attention. He sat for portions of the show, something the Elvis of the 1950s and 60s would never have done. His voice, while still capable of real powering bursts, showed signs of fatigue. Some songs were shortened. Some banter ran long, almost as if talking bought him a moment's rest between the physical demands of singing. And yet, this is the part that still gives people chills decades later. Witnesses in the crowd that night have described moments where he seemed fully present, fully in command, delivering lines with the same emotional gravity that made him a legend in the first place. It's a haunting duality, a man clearly struggling, and a performer still capable, in flashes, of reminding everyone exactly why they came. Photographers captured images from that show that would later become some of the most poignant in Elvis history, not because anything dramatic happened on stage, but because of what came after. Ordinary photos of an ordinary tour stop transformed, retroactively, into historical artifacts. The last time this voice would ever be heard live. The last time this audience would ever see him walk out under those lights at the end of the show. Elvis left the stage the way he always did, with a wave, a smile, a promise, unspoken but understood, that he'd be back on another stage in another city soon. The band packed up. The crew moved on to the next city on the schedule. Nobody treated it as anything other than a Sunday night show, one of hundreds they'd all done together. That's what makes it so heartbreaking in retrospect. There was no grand farewell, no final bow, no moment where anyone said goodbye on purpose. It ended the way it always ended, and then it simply never happened again. What happened between June 26th and August 16th, 1977, is where the story turns from bittersweet to genuinely tragic. Elvis returned to Graceland, his home in Memphis, to prepare for the next leg of his tour, scheduled to resume in the following weeks. On paper, life continued as normal. Rehearsals, family time, planning for upcoming shows. But those close to him in this period, staff, family, members of his circle known as the Memphis Mafia, later described a man increasingly isolated, increasingly unwell, and increasingly disconnected from the outside world's understanding of what he was going through. His relationship with prescription medication, something that had shadowed him for years, had become a serious and largely hidden crisis. The very machinery that protected his image from public scrutiny also shielded the severity of his condition from being addressed head-on. There's a particular kind of tragedy in stories like this. Not the sudden, unforeseeable kind, but the slow-motion kind that unfolds in front of people who care deeply and still can't stop it. Vernon Presley, his father, had expressed concern to associates. Physicians treating him have, in the decades since, faced intense scrutiny over the medications prescribed during this period. Books, documentaries, and investigations conducted long after. His death would attempt to reconstruct exactly how a global icon at the height of his fame could be so profoundly unwell behind closed doors while the public still saw only the legend on August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley was found unresponsive at Graceland. He was pronounced dead that afternoon at Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death and the surrounding medical circumstances would become subjects of debate, investigation, and public fascination for years afterward, but the human reality was simpler and sadder than any of the controversy. A man who had given everything to his audience for over 2 decades had nothing left to give. The Indianapolis concert, which no one had treated as significant at the time, was suddenly recontextualized overnight. Fans who had been in that arena realized they had witnessed something they could never get back. Band members who had shared the stage with him one final time carried that knowledge for the rest of their careers. A show that had felt, in the moment, like just another Sunday night became retroactively one of the most emotionally weighted nights in music history. The heartbreaking truth at the center of this story isn't really about a single concert. It's about the collective, culture-wide unwillingness to see what was happening to Elvis Presley in real time. Fans wanted the king forever. The industry around him needed the king forever, financially and symbolically. And so an entire ecosystem of people, some out of love, some out of fear, some out of financial dependence, helped maintain the illusion that everything was fine. Right up until it very suddenly WASN single quotes T. in the years since his death. Elvis's story has become a cautionary tale that echoes through the music industry again and again. The toll of fame, the danger of isolation, the way prescription medication crisis can hide in plain sight behind wealth and celebrity, and the particular tragedy of people being surrounded by others and still, somehow, being profoundly alone. His story predates but eerily foreshadows the deaths of numerous entertainers in the decades since, each time reigniting the same conversation about what could have been done differently, for the people who were actually in that Indianapolis arena on June 26, 1977. The emotional weight of that night only grew with time. What was, in the moment, an ordinary night of music became, in memory, something closer to a farewell nobody got to properly say. Fans have described watching old footage of that final show and noticing details they never would have registered. Otherwise, a longer pause between songs, a heavier presence on stage, a voice that occasionally strained where it once soared effortlessly. That's the real heartbreak buried in this story. Not that Elvis died. Tragically, at 42, that's a fact of history now. Understood and mourned. It's that so many of the signs were visible in real time to people who loved him and worked with him, and the culture around him, built on decades of image protection and financial incentive, wasn't equipped to respond to those signs with the honesty the moment required. Nobody was ready, not because the warning signs were invisible, but because almost everyone involved had reasons, conscious or not, to look away. 50 years later, that Indianapolis performance stands as one of the most quietly powerful artifacts in music history, not because of what happened on stage, but because of everything that happened in the weeks after, and everything that, in hindsight, was staring everyone in the face the whole time. Elvis Presley didn't get a final bow. He got a Sunday night show like any other, and it turned out to be the last one he'd ever give. That's the part of this story that lingers. Sometimes the most historic moments don't announce themselves. They just happen, quietly, and only reveal their weight in hindsight. What do you think? Do you believe the people around Elvis could have done more? Or was this simply a tragedy that had become unstoppable by that point? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who loves Elvis's music.